Welcome to Shoot First, Ask Questions Later, where we research the response of our past and review their relevance for today. This is your host, Moshe Kurtz. Welcome, my friends, to another episode of Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. Today, we are actually, for those who see it on the video, but those who are on the podcast, let me describe to you where we are sitting. We're sitting in my office at Congregation Sons of Israel in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And I'm sitting with my good friend, Dr. Noam Cohen, who is a visiting assistant professor at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania, right here, where he teaches Hebrew language and Jewish studies. And Dr. Cohen's research interests include gender and violence in the ancient Near East, the use of wine in Jewish and Levantine ritual, and local Allentown Jewish history. And we are, of course, going to pick the most interesting of the three, which is Allentown Jewish history.
Yes.
And it's a real pleasure to be able to kind of tap in. Usually I'm doing these interviews on Zoom with scholars in the United States and Israel, sometimes England and elsewhere. But we actually have a lot of real talent that's local here in the Allentown area. We have Muhlenberg College, which you work at. We have Lehigh University, DeSales, and a whole academic network. And I'm just really excited to showcase some of our local talent. And at the same time, our topic actually, while still fitting within the realm of Tshuvos, is going to be looking at Rabbi Zalman Krevsky. While I understand he didn't necessarily write his own tshuva, we're going to look at a tshuva of Rav Cook, written to the city or the Jewish community of Allentown. So, Dr. Cohen, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you. And Rabbi Kurtz, it's great to be here talking about this with you. So, yes, the tshuva today is a tshuva from Rav Cook addressed to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Krevsky, who was the chief rabbi in Allentown. And maybe we'll start with a little bit about Rabbi Krevsky.
Yeah, the funny thing is, here I am. I'm working at this shul for about 6 months now. It feels longer. We've been doing a lot of good stuff, Baruch Hashem, together. But it's kind of important for me. Obviously, I've gotten to meet some of the earlier rabbis, kind of spanning as far back as Rabbi Karabkin, which is at the turn of the 21st century. Yeah. But our history goes back a lot further than that, right?
It does, yeah. The Allentown Jewish community really establishes itself in the 1880s. But Rabbi Krevsky came to Allentown in 1916, where he was appointed the chief rabbi, at least of the Orthodox synagogues in Allentown.
Wait, I wanna just zone in on that point for a moment. The chief rabbi. I didn't know we had a chief rabbi here in Allentown. We have a chief rabbi?
He was the first and only chief rabbi of Allentown from 1916 until his death. And there were at first 2 Orthodox shuls that he kind of had domain over, and then later 3. And often they would have their own rabbis. When they didn't, he would fill in as acting rabbi, but his position was kind of the supervising chief rabbi.
Wow. So the community, Baruch Hashem, we're having more people come in and we're working on cultivating it. But it sounds like there was a lot of stuff going on that, here locally, in addition to our shul, there's a Reform temple, a conservative one as well. But we're the there's a Chabad, but we're the only standard Orthodox shul in town. So It sounds like there was a little bit of a different population back then.
Yes. Yeah. There was a very large Eastern European Jewish community, and we could talk a bit more about that later, but the first shul was called Agudas Achim, and then shortly thereafter, Sons of Israel started.
Yeah.
And then perhaps related to this tshuva, actually, a third shul kind of broke away from Agudas Achim. So Agudas Achim is sort of the mother synagogue of the Orthodox congregations. It had 2 breakaways, and then shortly after the year 2000, it closed and merged with Sons of Israel, so it kind of returned to its child in some kind of poetic way. But
but one of the things I understand that you're doing is, Dr. Cohen, you're going to be teaching a course at Muhlenberg College about the history of the Jews of Allentown. So I know you've been going through our shul archives amongst many other archives that exist within the Allentown community. So do you have a sense of just kind of how the Jewish community in Allentown came to be and how we got to where we are today? I know there's a lot to fill in over there, and I'm not going to have you summarize an entire semester's worth of information into our 30, 40, or we'll see how long this goes for.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, there are kind of Jews sporadically coming to Allentown. The so-called first Jew in Allentown purchased land in the 1760s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wait, that's before the founding of the United States.
Yes. And before Allentown was really called Allentown, it was Northampton County, and he purchased land from one of the Allens, right? The founding family of Allentown.
I never thought about that, actually, that there must have been some person with the name Allen, hence apparently there's a whole story behind Jim Thorpe, which is a little bit odd, but we'll save that for another time.
Yeah. So he purchased land from one of the Allens, but it doesn't seem like he really lived here for that long. And so we have Jews kind of coming in and out, but the community, so German Jews start coming to Allentown, I think around the 1850s. But again, there isn't a substantial community that we can tell until the 1880s. And that's when Russian Jews, Polish Jews, Lithuanian Jews really start coming in large numbers to the United States, and a lot of them end up in Allentown and surrounding areas. It seems in part because a lot of people in this area spoke German, and so these Jews who spoke Yiddish figured they would have an easier time communicating with locals.
I think you told me that you actually tracked down minutes from one of the shul's meetings that was completely in Yiddish. Do you have that on you? Or?
Oh, yeah. They're right over here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the people on the video won't be able. I mean, the people on the video might be able to see it. We'll make it available, or you'll just have to come to Allentown and.
So we have board meeting minutes starting from, I think, 1906 or so, written in Yiddish, and they're written in Yiddish for a long period of time, I think until the late 1930s or so.
That's interesting because one of the main reasons we take minutes at a board meeting is for for legal purposes, for audited. They should see that we're actually doing nonprofit stuff. So I'm not sure how that's going to help the government if they audit us and they see all these minutes in Yiddish.
Well, the numbers are numbers, but yeah.
Oh, okay, I got you.
But you're right. They're in Yiddish. And there are interesting things in here. Hopefully I'm going to be working through those. The community really began in the 80s, and we know that there were minyanim that were meeting in the 1880s. They didn't have kind of formal shuls yet. That comes in the early 90s. We get the first kind of official Orthodox congregation and also the first official Reform congregation, Knesset Israel. And so there is a rabbi, Rabbi Markowitz, who becomes the first Orthodox rabbi in Allentown, and he's sort of his own interesting character. He comes from Vilna.
Wait, but rabbis weren't Orthodox beforehand? What is that supposed to mean?
Well, so they didn't have a rabbi at first, right? So we have lots of immigrants coming from Eastern Europe, and in the 1880s, it kind of reaches a critical mass where they form, according to local newspapers, a Hebrew congregation, meaning people are getting together to daven. And so they're just renting a space. They don't have a formal shul space, and they don't seem to really have an official kind of ordained rabbi. I'm sure there were leaders of the congregation, but there wasn't somebody who was kind of officially the rabbi. And in the early 1890s, we get our first rabbis that are serving in Allentown. So there's a rabbi for the Reformed congregation, and there's a rabbi for the Orthodox congregation who had recently arrived from Vilna. And he dies, I think, in 1906, Rabbi Markowitz. And then Rabbi Krevsky comes in 1916. And when he comes, there were other people that were kind of serving as rabbi. And we're going to get into this because it's actually very relevant to the tshuva, but they didn't really have smicha, it seems. So they were kind of being called rabbi. They were acting as rabbi. But Rabbi Krevsky, when he arrives in 1916, he's the only Orthodox rabbi that has formal smicha and is kind of recognized as the rabbi. So Rabbi Krevsky was born in 1882 in what's now Belarus, in Smorgon, Belarus. It's kind of, I think it's like 90 kilometers east of Vilna. And actually in our local historical society, we have one of his Svarim. It's one volume of a Tanakh series, sort of like a proto-Mikro Gedolot, published in Vilna in like 1854. So it's very, very cool to have to be able to touch one of his Svarim.
Oh, we have it here in Allentown?
Yeah, it's in Allentown in the Lehigh County Historical Society, and you can see, which pages have his water stains from his mug. He's reading Eov.
Ooh, we're going to do a field trip, future field trip. I like this.
Yeah, it's a beautiful volume, kind of falling apart. It was really gorgeous. So yeah, he was born in what's now Belarus. He studied at the Slobodka Yeshiva, and I've been trying to find out as much as I can about Rabbi Krevsky. And if anybody listening has any stories about him,
I've run into a few people who are descendants. I think I was talking to my friend Chaim Rosenzweig who I ran into.
Yeah.
I also, when I was at Governor Shapiro's Hanukkah party, I ran into an older gentleman who said that Rabbi Krevsky was his grandfather. But I gave him my contact information and said, I should connect you with Dr. Noam Cohen, who's doing research. But
yes, so if anybody's listening.
I haven't heard from him yet, though.
If anybody's listening, you can find my email online. Send me an email. I'd love to talk. But so Rabbi Krevsky, he had 8 children. So, I think there are a lot of Krevsky descendants out there.
And then they multiply exponentially.
Yes, very good.
Yes.
So he was born in Belarus, studied at Slobodka Yeshiva, and I recently found an article in the Jewish Morning Journal, which was a Yiddish newspaper published out of New York City, from March 2nd, 1916. And it's a very long article. Usually when I'm doing a lot of archival research, and usually I'll find these little short articles. This was actually a very long article, and the whole article was about Rabbi Krevsky because he had just arrived in the United States from Harbin, China. And it tells...
From China?
From China.
What's he doing in China?
From Manchuria. So, right. So again, he was from Belarus near Vilna, and he studied in the yeshiva, but then he needed a job. So from this article, I learned that he was acting as a kind of traveling salesman, and he was married at this point and already had a few children, but he was traveling to make his parnasa, and he was visiting Harbin to sell his goods. Wow. And so Harbin was a very new city at that time. It was kind of built up because there was a railroad, I think it was called the Trans-Siberian Railroad, that had a stop in Harbin.
Yeah.
And so there was some kind of agreement between Chinese authorities and Russian authorities where kind of the Tsarist government was given permission to develop this town as this railroad town. And that brought a lot of Jews who were fleeing harassment and persecution in other parts of Russian rule. They brought them to Harbin. And so he goes there to sell them goods, and they say, "Oh, you're a rabbi? Our rabbi, Rabbi, I think he says Rabbi Levi, he just left, and we're looking for a rabbi. Would you be interested?" So he stays. And
you didn't have to go through the whole, YU system and sending a resume and all.
So you never know where life will bring you. He was a traveling salesman. This is what he told the newspaper. And it just so happens that this community was looking for a rabbi, and he got the job.
Wow.
So then he moves in 1907 to Harbin, and he's the rabbi there for 9 years.
And I thought being in Allentown was called out of town.
Yes.
Really puts things in perspective.
Right. Harbin was perhaps the most out of town you can get.
Yeah. We're only an hour and a half from Teaneck.
Yeah. So this is in northern China, in Manchuria, near Russia, and again at the time kind of under Russian control in part. And so he's the rabbi there for 9 years, and then due to political happenings, it seems that around 1916, the Tsarist government exerts more control over Harbin, and it's become this big city. And Rabbi Krevsky says in his interview at the time, there were about 10,000 Jews living in Harbin.
Wow.
In 1916, which is substantial. And then at its height, it reaches around 20,000 people have estimated. It only lasts for another 30 years or so and then kind of entirely disbands. But so there are about 10,000 Jews living in Harbin, but the Tsarist government starts kind of imposing harsher restrictions. And in particular, they're looking to conscript men in Harbin.
Yeah.
And so Rabbi Krevsky learns he's going to be conscripted, and he then attempts to flee, and he does. We'll talk a little bit later. It's, I think, maybe even related to the tshuva, the manner in which he flees, but he flees Harbin. He makes it to Japan, and from Japan, he gets passage to San Francisco, and he tells a story in this article from 1916 about how the captain saw he wasn't eating anything on the boat.
Oh.
And he says the captain was so kind. He asked him why he wasn't eating, and he explained, well, I only eat kosher food. So the captain supplied him with some raw ingredients. He gave him sugar and other ingredients. And then Rabbi Krevsky says he actually brought some kind of little stove with him that he had purchased in Japan, a new stove. Huh. And he cooked potatoes and other items during this voyage that he and other kosher observing passengers ate.
I know that doesn't sound, so delectable, but this is a Sarabateves, and I'm starving now as you bring this up. I would go for that now.
Yeah, potatoes and sugar. I mean,
I'll take it. I'm starving at this point.
It could be bad. So he arrives in San Francisco, and then he has some friends that, it seems he had a good friend who was the rabbi of Elizabeth, New Jersey, who... Rabbi
Teitz?
It was not Rabbi Teitz, Rabbi Konvitz, I'm not quite sure how it's pronounced. Mm-hmm. He later becomes, I believe, the head of the OU, actually, at some point.
Oh.
And so he stayed with him in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and then there are a few other Yiddish articles in this paper where he's speaking around town in New York City. There was even a smorgana Stiebel, like a smorgana shul from people from his hometown. So he speaks there a few times. They put out ads essentially saying, there's this amazing rabbi who's available. A congregation should hire him. They'd be lucky to hire him. Mm. And then, as we know, the Allentown Jewish community does hire him.
Wow. So that's a great summary, kind of some key points of the biography. Yeah. Now, kind of bring us, I guess not to present day, but bring us to the time of the tshuva we're looking at. Now, here's what's noteworthy. The tshuva we're about to look at is not actually from Rabbi Krevsky himself. It's from Rav Cook, who presumably is writing from Eretz Yisrael, I believe, at this time, to
Rabbi Krevsky. Yes.
So maybe tell us about the tshuva. I'm a little confused about what does he have to do with Rav Cook? Why is Rav Cook writing to Allentown? Maybe start even just with the scenario. What's the shaila over here?
Okay, so the shaila is about burial on second day Yom Tov, but in particular, it's about riding with the body of the deceased on second day Yom Tov in a car. That's really what the shaila is about. So one of the difficulties of the shaila is that it's undated, which for me, doing a lot of archival research, this is kind of frustrating. So Rabbi Krevsky came to Allentown in 1916. He's mentioned by name in the tshuva as the person who wrote the shaila. So 1916 could be the earliest date. We can get in a little bit later about when exactly it might have been written. We don't know. But why was he writing a question to Rav Cook? Right. This is something that I was preoccupied with. When would he have crossed paths with Rav Cook?
Did you mention he was in Vilna for a little bit?
So he grew up very close to Vilna. Yeah.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, Rav Cook was there. Check Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Listeners, let me know if I'm wrong, but maybe they know each other from the Altaheim.
It's possible, right? And the other tshuva, so there are at least two tshuvas that were written in response to shailas from Rav Shlomo Zalman Krevsky. There's this one that we're talking about today, and there's a second published in Levush Mordechai by Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Slobodka Yeshiva, and that's where Rabbi Krevsky studied. So that's a connection that we know about. And he sent him a shaila when he was still living in Harbin.
Wow.
And it was a shaila about the mikvah, about whether the way they designed the mikvah was completely kosher. The water was running through a pipe that was covered with stones, and this whole question. And it's like a 10-page tshuva. I can't.
So I'm glad you didn't choose the 10-page tshuva. I have a not even 1-page tshuva over here, which is really good for our purposes.
Yes.
Though while it's a very brief tshuva, it's a very eye-opening tshuva in terms of the sociological import.
Very much.
So apparently there was a psak given by, as he describes in the tshuva, by somebody who is Mischana b'shem Rav, who goes by the title of a rabbi, but I think this gets to what you were saying before, that Rabbi Krevsky was the chief rabbi, and he had these kind of auxiliary pseudo-clergy figures that were sort of working under him, but maybe not always listening to him, it sounds like.
That's right, exactly. And one more thing on the relationship with Rav Cook before we get into actual tshuva. So I found some handwritten letters that Rabbi Krevsky had written, and they're all to the Eitz Chaim Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. So this is pre-State of Israel. And most of them actually have to do with funds that were raised by the local Jewish community in Allentown, supporting the yeshiva and also the Bikur Cholim that was affiliated with it. And And some of the letters are about his congregants in Allentown that had recently died. And he writes about them, complimenting them, how they were great people, and also how they donated to support the community in Jerusalem. And his request is that they write the names and the yahrzeits of these Allentown Jewish community members in the yahrzeit books in the Eitz Chaim Yeshiva. And he sometimes asks, I think, also for yahrzeit posters and things like that. And I was really excited. This connects, I promise. I was very excited to find in our local historical society archives, one family had donated some materials, and among them were 2 yahrzeit posters. So these beautiful printed posters with handwritten names and dates of yahrzeits of their parents. And one of these yahrzeit posters is signed by somebody in Rav Cook's family. And I've been trying to decipher the signature. I'm quite sure that it says, I believe it says Shmuel HaKohen Cook, who I think was a brother of Rav Cook. There's very little about him. So if anyone out there is a Rav Cook biographer, there's one letter that Rav Cook wrote to his brother Shmuel that's published somewhere. So I think this is him. There's another letter written by somebody in the States to Rav Cook's father, who was also working for this kind of like old age home in Jerusalem. So it seems that it was a bit of a family enterprise where the Cooks were all working for the Jerusalem Jewish community, in particular with this kind of old age home or
I guess I didn't know there were that
or
yeshivish,
burial kind of stuff. Yeah,
that's like a really yeshivish chassidish move to being told like the nursing home stuff.
Yes, yeah. So it was like the Moshav Zakenim or something like that.
Moshav Zakenim, I love that. As long as it's not the Moshav Leitzim.
So he was writing, Rabbi Krevsky, to bring it back, was writing letters. He was corresponding a lot with the leadership of these institutions, and it seems either directly or indirectly with members of Rav Cook's family. So there certainly was a connection there where he was corresponding with that community, if not regularly with Rav Cook himself, not quite sure. So that's how I think he ends up sending the Shaila. Perhaps he could have even sent it along with donations, etc., or his requests for yurtsites and things like that. Maybe he just would have included this Shaila along with them.
Right. Now, this is interesting because the Shaila is more post facto, it sounds like, and I guess you could afford to send a Shaila overseas if it's already taken care of, or I don't know if that's the right way to put it. But what's the scenario here?
Okay,
what's the
right.
issue?
So Rav Cook says the scenario is, I received a letter from a Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Krevsky in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and he writes that last Shavuot, Yom Tov Sheni of Shavuot of last year, there was somebody in one of the shuls in Allentown who calls himself a Rav, who in actuality is the shochet and bodek of the community. And somebody died. Somebody in the community died on Yom Tov Sheni. And Rabbi Krevsky writes to Rav Cook that this person gives a heter in the shul that it is okay for those accompanying the body to ride in an automobile on Yom Tov Sheni. And in fact, this man himself even accompanies the body on Yom Tov Sheni in a car.
I guess at least he felt confident enough with his psak that he was willing to do it himself.
Yes.
That would rub me the wrong way if he told other people to drive on the second day of Yom Tov. Now here's what's interesting also is that, Rav Cook is, I think at this point in Eretz Yisrael, and, he's very Zionist to say the least. That's probably the understatement of the century. So I could almost see him wanting to really drill down on the demarcation and distinction between the Holy Land and those in the diaspora, that those in Eretz Yisrael keep one day, those who are outside keep 2 days of Yom Tov. We won't get into all the technicalities of why that's true. But basically, it sounds like this, I guess for him, he's putting it in air quotes here, rabbi, to rule that they can drive on the second day of Yom Tov for a burial is something that, well, how does he respond?
Yeah, so he responds very seriously, and he
Oilas naim shekach shomos. Woe to the ears that hear this.
Right. So he says he's distressed to receive this letter from Rabbi Krevsky. Exactly. He's very upset. And really the extent of the tshuva is him saying this is very distressing and affirming apparently Rabbi Krevsky's concern and saying this is very serious, and this should not happen, right? We have to be machmir on this. We can't have any heterim. Yeah,
it sounds like not just machmir. He says that this guy was, yarim yad b'torah hakadosha v'chal yontiv b'faresia. He sounds like this guy is tearing apart the Torah.
Exactly right. Yarim yad b'torah hakadosha. So he's responding, saying this is a real problem. This is completely unacceptable. And he says it's explicit. Bechol poskim rishonim v'achronim. Right? He's saying it's extremely explicit. You can't ride an animal, therefore you certainly can't ride in a car on Yom Tov to accompany a body.
Now, truth is, this is already discussed in the Gemara, if I'm not mistaken, right? The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah?
Perhaps. It's definitely covered in Beitza.
Oh, sorry, in Beitza.
In Beitza, Daf Vav, where the Gemara says it is permitted to bury a body on Yom Tov, on second, I think any day Yom Tov, and even second day Rosh Hashanah.
Right, the first day we would do Amir La'akum, we would have a non-Jew intervene, but it sounds like the second day of Yom Tov, it's all fair game, and things kind of became, I guess you go through the commentaries and the later poskim, things got a little bit hardened as time went on.
Right.
And that seems to be the position that he's taking here.
Exactly. Right. And he's saying, everyone agrees this is usher. And he says, Hineni modim bazeh et chomer ha'isur. Right? So this is, everyone agrees this is a serious isser.
And this seems to be less of a real halachic analysis. It's more just him expressing how taken aback he is. I can't believe you guys are doing this in Allentown. And I guess what kind of a question that occurs to me here is, if this was so bad, why wasn't Rabbi Krevsky consulted before this funeral took place? Was he on vacation? Do we know what's going on? If he's the chief rabbi, shouldn't he be giving the psak on this before it happens?
Right. So this is perhaps part of the institutional framework in Allentown where he was the chief rabbi. But if there was somebody serving as a rabbi of one of the local Orthodox congregations, he would just go and daven there. And he was in charge of things like kashrut. He was in charge of shchita. He was overseeing things. And yeah, he would give psak, mikvah, etc. But he wouldn't necessarily be the kind of the Rav in the shul making decisions. So it is interesting that this other unnamed rabbi, or as the tshuva says, someone who refers to himself as a rabbi.
It's a no true Scotsman fallacy.
Yes. But that, I think that might reflect kind of a little bit of the hands-off approach that Rav Krevsky would have had in terms of kind of day-to-day what's happening in the shuls. And this seems to have happened in the shul. But it also depends on perhaps when this happened. And again, we don't know. But I have a guess on when this might have happened. And if I'm right, it probably happened very early on when Rav Krevsky came to Allentown.
Right.
So it could have been within the first year or so. So that also could reflect maybe he didn't intervene, maybe he had just arrived and he didn't want to intervene to cause kind of conflict in the community, but he was upset by it. And the way that the tshuva is written, it almost seems like you were saying, there's almost nothing to do, right? He's just saying, this is usher, right? Like he's saying, this is usher. It almost might have been Rabbi Krevsky mentioning in passing, like, I came to Allentown and this happened, isn't this terrible? And then Rav Cook writes back, yes, this is terrible. Kind of commiserating.
Yeah, we got to ask some of the folks who've been here, well, your family that you married into, the Notice family's been here a while. Have to ask Rabbi Alan Wiener. I don't know if he wanted me to give him a shout or not. I don't know if he wanted to be associated, but he showed me this tshuva initially.
Yes.
I have to quote a B'Shem Amro, but he might be upset.
So I do have some material that I found in local newspapers that I think suggest might be related to this case. Again, you can't be quite sure.
Wow.
But
so you've been digging through the Morning Call and other archives, right?
Oh, yeah. I've been digging through it all. Yeah, all of our local Allentown newspapers. So Rabbi Krevsky, again, came in 1916. So Shavuot 1916 would have been like right around when he had arrived. And there was a big split in the Orthodox Jewish community in 1917. Where somebody who was the shochet at Agudas Achim, which was the first Orthodox shul, someone who was the shochet kind of breaks away to start his own shul, which was called Sharei Shalom. And Sharei Shalom moved down the block, literally on the same block as Agudas Achim, and eventually kind of also falls under the purview of Rabbi Krevsky. So it's sort of interesting where it's a breakaway. There seem to have been quite hard feelings, but eventually kind of there's some reconciliation perhaps, and they literally moved down the block because the community, the Eastern European Orthodox community, was so consolidated. Even though they were breaking away from the shul, they all lived right next to the shul anyway. So the breakaway shul is next door. Maybe two addresses down the block from the shul that they're breaking away from.
So what's the headline over there?
So here we have Hebrews organized new congregation, July 5th, 1917.
The Hebrews. We're the Hebrews. I love it.
It's talking about Rabbi Simon Glassman, who was the shochet. And he announces that he is starting a new shul, and it lists the kind of the founding members of the community that are signing on to this new shul. And they're actually very prominent members of the community. This wasn't a small breakaway. This was a very significant breakaway. And there's a rejoinder from the shul that is published in the two local papers.
This is exciting.
So Rabbi Glassman makes an announcement that he will be starting his own shul, right? And it's from my perspective, it's a very even-handed announcement. It's not aggressive at all. He says, the community is growing and there isn't really so much room in Agudas Achem. We need a new shul. He doesn't kind of...
Very diplomatic.
Yes, it's very diplomatic. He says, it's a big community. We need another shul. I'll be starting a shul. These are the members that have agreed to come with me. And then Agudas Achem responds. And this is...
Empire Strikes Back. June
16th, 1917. The headline, Communication from President Levy. And... it's this essentially open letter from Samuel Levy, and he kind of point by point rebuts this announcement of this new synagogue. He says, this article appeared that, that Simon Glassman is starting a new synagogue, and he says there isn't enough room in the shul. The community is too big. They're like, no, that's not true. Actually, the community is smaller than he says. He's inflating the number of Jews in Allentown.
Not something you would usually argue about.
Yes. And the newspaper reports this will be the fourth synagogue in Allentown. This is false. There are only 2 Orthodox synagogues in Allentown. This will be the third. This is a misrepresentation because the original article says it will be the fourth synagogue, and there is the fourth one is KI, Knesset Israel, which is still around, that had long been established by that point. So it would have been and becomes the fourth synagogue in Allentown. But Agudas Achem says, well, but this would only be the third Orthodox synagogue. So why are you even saying that? Why are you counting us with them, kind of thing?
They were machshavit as a synagogue.
And then they say also, Simon Glassman calls himself Rabbi Glassman. He was never recognized as a rabbi by our congregation. He was elected to take care of kosher meat known as shochet. The only chief rabbi recognized by the Jewish community in the city is Rabbi Zalman Krevsky.
Ooh, I think I just put the pieces together.
So this is very interesting. So in this open letter from the president of the synagogue, he says, this man calls himself a rabbi. He's not a rabbi. In fact, he was the shochet. And he says, and why is he starting a new synagogue? To quote, the congregation defeated him as shochet, meaning he was kicked out of the position of shochet. And what they're implying is he was upset that he was demoted or fired from his position as shochet. So he's starting his own shul in response, and he calls himself a rabbi. He's not even a rabbi. So this may or may not be the exact case that lies behind the shaila, but it's certainly very similar.
He's the quote, rabbi.
He's the shochet and bodek who calls himself a rabbi, which he does. He calls himself a rabbi, and then they're hitting back and saying, well, he's not really a rabbi. He doesn't seem to have smicha, and we don't call him rabbi. We call Rabbi Krevsky rabbi. He is our rabbi. This guy is the Shochet and Bodek, who maybe was in some way filling in shul in a rabbinic position, but he wasn't the rabbi.
Seemed like a glorified gabbai or gabbai in steroids, however you want to put it.
Yes, exactly.
So this is remarkable. So it sounds like you may have identified the shochet of our tshuva.
I may have. I don't want to be too confident about it, but it's an extremely similar scenario, if not the exact scenario. And then what happens is, right, if this is the case, then we can reconstruct that perhaps when Rabbi Krevsky received the response from Rav Cook, he said, so I'm right. This is something to be concerned about, and we can't have this guy as the shochet. So perhaps, maybe, upon receiving the tshuva, he fires the shochet. I think that's really a fair assumption. Whether this Rabbi Glassman is the subject of the tshuva or not, Rav Cook is kind of affirming his concern, saying this is problematic. So if this was the case, they fire the shochet. The shochet was essentially serving as the rabbi of the shul. So a lot of the shul liked him. People that were on the shul board, they're listed as kind of following him when he says he's going to start his new shul. So this is a big rupture in the synagogue. They start this new shul, Shari Shalom, and then Rabbi Glassman well, whether you call him a rabbi or not, he dies shortly thereafter, actually. So,
not too funny.
Not funny. Yeah,
not funny.
Well,
Sorry.
the whole situation has its drama, but yeah, then he dies, and there's kind of subsequent drama because of what was going on, where he was kicked out of his position. His wife refuses to allow, and so they haven't built the new shul yet that he announced he was going to build. He dies before the shul comes to fruition, so there's still Agudas Achim, but his wife says, no, we can't have the funeral service in Agudas Achim because they kicked him out. So they hold it outside of the shul. The local newspapers report this is the biggest Jewish funeral that had ever happened in the city of Allentown.
Oh, wow.
And then after he dies, still members of the community get together and they hold a meeting and they say, we are going to build this shul in memory of Rabbi Glassman, and they do. So then we get the establishment of Sha'arei Shalom down the block after he dies.
So he becomes like a martyr.
Exactly. Wow. So again, you can't say for certain because the tshuva is undated. So this, I think it's extremely similar. This is very likely the situation that lies behind the tshuva. If it's not, it can still give us insight into kind of what was going on in the community, and kind of the dynamics involved with having the chief rabbi, the local rabbi, etc.
Yeah. Well, the good news you're going to tell our listeners is that there hasn't been any drama since then, right?
Oh no, yeah, everything's great. Everything's great.
There's no other drama that happened in Allentown between that incident and any of the ensuing decades.
No, not
right?
at all. And there was one more thing I wanted to talk about Rabbi Krevsky and the tshuva that I forgot to mention. So he's obviously very concerned about this this ruling that was given in Allentown that the people accompanying the body could ride in the car, and Rav Cook is very concerned about it. Perhaps and I should say, so Rav Cook, right, was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Jerusalem in the British Mandate. The chief rabbi or the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Jerusalem who succeeds him, Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, writes in the Har Tzvi, he rules that it is permitted for people burying a body on Yom Tov to ride in an automobile if it is driven by a non-Jew. Right. So interesting to note that Rav Cook comes down hard on this case, and then the Har Tzvi says, if the car is being driven by a non-Jew, this is okay. It
sounds like even in Allentown, in that case there, they just drove themselves.
We don't know.
I guess, it doesn't really
we don't
say
know.
that.
I think it says that they rode in a car.
Be'otomobilim.
Right. So
Gam hu nasa imam biyantav, but it doesn't say who was driving.
Right. So my guess is they probably would have hired a non-Jew to drive them. It doesn't say.
Could be.
But I think that the Har Tzvi is kind of coming to a different conclusion than Rav Cook, certainly being much more lenient. And for Rabbi Krevsky, he may also have been very concerned because he seems to have a personal history with riding on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So looking through the archival material, I brought it with me. I have it somewhere in the pile of papers I have here. One of his sons, right, so again, he had 8 children. One of his sons wrote a little testimonial about his father and telling the story of how his father fled Harbin when he learned he was being conscripted. He writes, and Rabbi Krevsky himself tells a similar version of the story in 1916, and we can get into kind of how that works with different versions of stories, etc. But here, his son tells a story that so they were hiding from the Tsarist army, hid by day, ran by night. So one Friday, Erev Shabbos, it was time for the escapees to take off and travel by cart at night. So these are the men who are of age to be conscripted. he says they all took off except Rabbi Krevsky, who refused to ride on Shabbos. Oh. So the men are fleeing conscription because they know that they're going to be mistreated. It's a tough life being in the Tsarist army. Mm-hmm. And the men of the Jewish community flee as Rabbi Krevsky's son is telling the story, so told to him by his father. They flee, but it's Erev Shabbos, and Rabbi Krevsky says, I'm not going to ride on Shabbos. So he doesn't flee. Then, of course, all of the men that had fled in the wagons were captured. Wow. Rabbi Krevsky was not. And Rabbi Krevsky in his own, and then he makes his way to Japan in his own. Like
a perfect Art Scroll Guttle story over here.
Yes. And in his own version of the story from 1916 that he tells a Jewish Morning Journal, in his version, he says, actually, it was Erev Yom Kippur.
May as well up the ante while we're at it.
Well, this is the previous story, but yes. Right, so he says it was Erev Yom Kippur, and they came to, conscript the men in the Jewish community. And he gets out of it, and then they come back, and he says, well, let me say goodbye to my family. So he goes to say goodbye to this family, and then the other guys go without him, and they get ambushed.
But it sounds like even from his earlier days, the idea of avoiding driving on Shabbos or Yom Tov is something
so
very
it's
important.
Part of his origin story.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Any rabbi would be concerned about that. Obviously, Rav Moshe's iconic tshuva in the first volume of Igros Moshe, a rabbi who encourages congregants to drive to shul, is basically a masis, a choti machti esaravim, terrible things.
Right, but these are scenarios that are much more sensitive, right? So he's fleeing.
There's this rationale, right?
Right, he's fleeing conscription, and the other members of the community. You could argue
it's really pikuach nefesh.
Exactly.
I mean, you'd be put on the front lines and die.
I think that's exactly what you could argue. So it's interesting that in this Krevsky family story, right, he's already taking this so seriously. He says, that I'm not going to ride as a passenger on Shabbos or Yom Kippur, whatever it is. So he may kind of already had this idea that even in a case that's almost pikuach nefesh, obviously the case for burying the dead body, not pikuach nefesh, but a serious matter as well. But he may already have kind of had this idea, we have to be strict in such cases and not ride on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Yeah.
Now, if we have just a couple or more minutes, if you're okay with this, I reference other drama that happened in Allentown. I know this comes up in your course. I'm not talking about anything recent, by the way. I'm talking about I think you shared at my installation ceremony that you were kind enough to speak at about a chazan or rabbi for Yontif they tried hiring one time. And are you okay? It's a fun one. You share that one briefly, and then we'll do a wrap up.
Sure, yeah. So there are a lot of interesting stories from the very early days of the
Wild West.
So what we're talking about is primarily the late 80s and then 1880s, I should say.
I was going to say, I thought it was a little bit longer ago.
1880s and 1890s. And then, the first decade of the 20th century. That's when the most interesting things happened, and perhaps that's when the local newspapers were most comfortable sharing the gossip and the drama, because in many ways the newspapers, that was their job, was kind of sharing the drama.
Still is.
Yeah. So the case you were referring to was, I think it was in the late 1890s. I forget the exact year now. I have it saved somewhere, but the Agudas Achim congregation, so the Orthodox shul didn't have an acting rabbi that year, and it was Rosh Hashanah. So they wanted a rabbi to come in for Rosh Hashanah. Presumably he's going to really, act like a chazan. They call him a rabbi. He was a rabbi. Mm-hmm. But they were hiring him presumably to be more of a chazan for Rosh Hashanah. So they hire a rabbi from Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Yeah. He comes, and immediately upon arrival in Allentown, he is arrested by the local sheriff. And so the local newspaper, it's on the front page, and it says, "Rabbi in jail." And it tells the story of how he was wanted for larceny in Pottstown, and the police in Pottstown somehow got wind that he was hired to be the rabbi for Rosh Hashanah in Allentown. So they send a message to the Allentown sheriff, and they say, keep an eye out for a rabbi.
Wait, what did he do?
larceny, so some kind of theft.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So they say, keep an eye out. Rabbi, aged 40 years old, gray whiskers is how they describe him. And he's arrested upon arrival. And then the shul in Allentown, they say, we'll pay his bail so that he can lead davening on Rosh Hashanah, because there's the Erev Rosh Hashanah.
That's what you want to be leading Rosh Hashanah davening.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So we have no choice. We need somebody. and the sheriff rebuffs them, and he's not let out on bail from the congregation. And the newspaper says, they're not holding services because they don't have their rabbi because he was in jail.
This is a good advertisement because we have our local county sheriff, Sheriff Johanna, coming in a couple of weeks to speak at the school.
Yes.
So things have turned around, but we have what to aspire to, obviously.
Exactly. And there are lots of other good stories from Allentown, Pennsylvania. Yep.
Yeah. So Dr. Cohen, just a little bit about, your research and where you're going. I mean, I know you have a number of interests, the Jewish history of Allentown, also Mazel Tov on the publication or defense of your recent dissertation on.
Thank you.
What was the official title, by the way?
Portraying spousal violence in ancient West Asia.
That is heavy stuff. We might have to figure out another podcast to talk about that. But Dr. Cohen, it's really wonderful having you here, and your wife, Dr. Evie, here in the community as well. The Notice family that you've married into is a very long time Allentown family, and I'm sure they're all shepping nachas the amount of research that you're doing into this. And, God willing, this will be the first of many discussions we have here on the podcast, but I'm sure we'll get to, I think I might want to audit your course actually at Muhlenberg. So thank you so much, Dr. Cohen, for coming on the podcast, and really excited for reading more of your research.
Thank you, Rabbi Kurtz. This was such a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate us, subscribe, and leave a review. If you'd like to submit a letter to the editor, sponsor an episode, or just have a general inquiry, please email me at mitchellmkurtz@gmail.com. This is Moshe Kurtz, and I look forward to learning with you next time on Shoot First, Ask Questions Later.